Welcome back to our Bible class time together. Jim Morgan is here again with me, and we're going to be sharing from the Gospel of John today with you.
And he's Aaron Tremblay.
That's right. And really appreciate all of you who took time to watch our class last week.
Absolutely. And encourage us.
And we just want to stress again, if you have any questions or anything that you want to share or ask, feel free to email them through the church office email. I'll go ahead and put that up on the screen for you so you can have easy access to it. And between now and next week, Jim and I will try to get together, and one of us or the other will certainly respond to your questions. So really appreciate everyone who took time to join us. Continuing to pray that you be encouraged and be steadfast in your faith, even though we're having some pretty difficult times right now. It's good to continue to study the Word of God together. So today we thought, since we're in what some people refer to as Holy Week, between the triumphal entry and then followed by the death, the burial, and ultimately the resurrection of Jesus, we thought it would be a great thing to look at, would you call it, the second
most famous resurrection in the Bible.
Second most famous resurrection in the Bible, which obviously has to do with Lazarus from John chapter 11. And looking at what we learn about who Jesus is, what we learn about the purpose of Lazarus' resurrection, how does that help us in understanding ultimately what Jesus will do, and then how does that apply to our life, this idea of the fact that Jesus has the power over life and death, and over the fact that there is a resurrection. There was a resurrection of Jesus Christ, but there is still a resurrection, hope of resurrection for us.
Because there was his, there is ours.
Correct.
And will be ours.
And will be ours. So we're going to be in John chapter 11, if you want to take a minute and turn there in your Bibles. And we're going to be talking about the story of Lazarus today. Jim, I'll let you begin.
Okay, I told you this is probably my favorite story in the Bible. As a preacher, as a teacher, I've gone back to this story because there's so many different levels. But it's a story about belief. It's a story about faith. I think you have to remember that as you go through, that what Mary is saying, Jesus doesn't recognize, Mary and Martha both, Jesus doesn't recognize that as faith. Mm-hmm. When you get down to the very end, to give away the end of the story so nobody will be stressed, in verse 40, Jesus says, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" Which means that up to that point, at least the way I see it, Jesus still hasn't seen anything that looks like faith yet. Mm-hmm. There have been slogans, there have been words, but faith, like in most of the Bible, almost all of the Bible, faith is nothing if it doesn't result in action.
That's right.
So when you go back to the very beginning, Jesus does some very strange things. Mm-hmm. We were talking before we went on camera about the fact that when they sent the messengers out to Jesus, Lazarus was still alive. They go to Jesus, and apparently it's only about two miles. If you look down at verse 18, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. And so apparently Jesus just didn't bother to go 2 miles. He didn't attend the funeral. He wasn't there when Lazarus was sick, which explains why the sisters are rather upset with him when he gets there.
Let's talk about what made those 2 miles a really long 2 miles, though, because preceding the story in chapter 10, if you go to chapter 10 and verse 31, the last time Jesus was that 2 miles closer, the Jews were picking up stones and they're about to kill him. Mm-hmm. And so in verse 39 of chapter 10, it says, again, they sought to arrest him, but he escaped from their hands. So he has to escape. There's a threat on his life. And so he has to withdraw from that place. And that's where we're going to see some of this faith exchange even at the beginning of 11. So it's 2 miles, and part of the reason perhaps that he's not inclined to go, at least according to his disciples' response, is maybe he's afraid for his life. Mm-hmm. And so even when Jesus says, "Hey, I'm going to go," they're like, "Whoa, wait a minute. No, don't go. Yeah. That's a long 2 miles, Jesus. There's a lot of stones between here and there, that people might pick up and cast at you." And
Thomas is worried about their safety as well, because down in verse 16, let's also go that we may die with him.
Yeah.
So apparently, there's a lot of faith there when you walk into a place where you think it's going to result in your death.
But you're ready to go anyway.
But you go anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it actually gets to it a few chapters later, they're all going to leave.
That's right. That's right.
So it's a lot easier to talk your faith than it is to act your faith.
Absolutely. And his faith, even though he has faith in Jesus, enough faith that he's willing to go, he should have had, his faith is kind of misplaced still, because Jesus tells him what he's going there to do.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't say, and I'm going to go there and die. He says,
Yeah.
I'm going there with a purpose to fulfill. But Thomas is just kind of caught up on the fact that, no, they're going to kill us when we get there.
Yeah, we're dead.
Don't you realize, Jesus? So let's pick up, let's just go ahead and start in verse 1. It says, now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, meaning to Jesus, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. Now, obviously, in the message she sends, there's an expectation for him to come, right?
Yeah.
She doesn't just say, hey, this guy named Bob is sick. No, this is Lazarus whom you love.
Mm-hmm.
So the assumption is if somebody you love, you're going to come right away,
Yeah.
because you want to make sure you're there for them.
And it gives you an idea how much Jesus did think of him, because this is the second person in the Gospel of John that's going to be referred to as the one that Jesus loved.
Mhm.
And the other one was the Apostle John himself.
Yes.
And so it's not just a friend, this is someone that's on a level with the Apostle John that we know as the Apostle of Love.
Absolutely.
So, it's a pretty serious situation. And yeah, they assume, well, if you love him that much, he's going to show up, he's going to heal him, everything's going to be fine. I think it's interesting they have faith that he can heal, but once he dies, they figure there's nothing he can do.
Yeah, and that is a great point, because that's going to come up as we move through the story, the idea that it's too late for Jesus to do something.
Yeah.
You could have done something, but it's too late
Yeah.
now. You waited too long.
And he'll be resurrected in the last day,
Yeah.
but that's it.
And it's to me, that's kind of the same attitude the apostles have after Jesus' death and burial.
Yep.
It's too late. I mean, God could have brought him off the cross. He could have called these angels down to save him.
Mm-hmm.
All these things he could have done if he was the Messiah. But now it's too late. God can't help now.
One of the most poignant words to me in the entire gospel is that Peter says, I'm going fishing.
Hmm.
He's going back to the old life because that's it. Everything's over. I'm going fishing.
Hmm.
And the others go with him.
That's right. Back to normal life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So verse 4, it says, but when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus' statement is pretty interesting there, because he says this illness does not lead to death.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, Lazarus does succumb to the illness and die from it. So what do you think's going on there?
Well, I think it's a statement about, obviously, the resurrection. Because no matter what the illness is, coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, Spanish influenza, whatever, no illness really leads to permanent death.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is going to be restored to life. Jesus is going to set an example here. Let me show you what's going to happen in the future. I'll give you a clue. I'll give you a sample with what's going to do with Lazarus. This is what's waiting for everybody.
Yeah.
So no illness, if you're a believer or a non-believer, is really going to lead to permanent death.
That's right. And if you back up a little bit and you remember when he heals the blind man and they're asking whose fault was it, the mother or the
Mhm.
father, and Jesus said, no, this happened so that God could be glorified,
Mhm.
right? Same principles at work here in verse 4, that this is ultimately going to be, this illness is going to be for the glory
Yeah.
of God. God's going to demonstrate who he is through this. And notice he doesn't say just for the glory of God, but also that the Son of God may be
Yeah.
glorified.
And then I think the next verse, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, because you're going to start doubting that. All the way through this, well, if you really loved them, how come you didn't show up?
Absolutely. And one more statement on 4 is when you get to chapter 12, the triumphal entry, the reason all the people are following Jesus, it says, is because of the raising of Lazarus.
Mm-hmm.
So the Son of God is glorified ultimately through this
Yeah.
illness and Lazarus' death and his resurrection. It ultimately ends up to this multitude who not only follows Jesus into Jerusalem, but welcomes him as king.
Mm-hmm.
So he does
And
get
they
glorified.
got exactly the wrong idea.
Right, exactly. So you're right, verse 5, we learn again that his love is not only towards Lazarus, but it's towards Martha and her sister as well. And so verse 6 says, so when he
By the way, one more thing
Yeah,
on
go
that.
ahead.
I think that's very interesting. Jesus loved Martha and her sister. There's no doubt from the very beginning, this is a story about Martha.
Mhm.
This is not about Lazarus. He's got the easy part here. He's dead. But this is a story about Martha and
Mhm.
about what faith is. So if you want to find out what faith is, look at Martha,
Hmm.
because this is her story.
Yeah, and you know, you have the belief part and the glorifying God part, right?
Yeah.
And God's going to be glorified no matter what Mary and Martha do. God's going to be glorified because the dead's going to be raised.
Yeah.
So God's going to get the glory for that. But the question is, what do you do with that? And where's your belief as you move through the story? So it's an important point. Verse 6 says, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed for 2 days longer at the place where he was. Now, what do you think is significant about the fact that he stays 2 days longer after he gets this information?
Well, because he's waiting for Lazarus to die. You know, he in verse 11, he's, you know, we'll get that in a minute, but he says, I'm going to wake him up. He's asleep. And John's going to tell us he didn't mean that he had fallen asleep. He means he's dead. Like I told you, somewhere in this is going to work. He's dead, Joe.
So we notice that Jesus' focus here is not the illness. It's not Lazarus' current condition. Jesus' focus is on the glorification of God and the glorification of the Son of God, right?
Yeah.
That's his purpose here, glorification of God. So he waits an extra 2 days, like you said, for Lazarus to pass, because his focus is, once he's dead, now I can go and God will get the glory for what's about to unfold. But between here and there, he's got to deal with Mary and Martha, and he's got to deal with his disciples and convincing them to go back to where they just withdrew from.
And this multitude of people that have shown up for the funeral.
Right, exactly. So verse 7 says, then after this, he said this to the disciples, let's go to Judea again. And here's the disciples' response in verse 8. Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going to go there again? In other words, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
Right? Those guys want to kill you, and you want to go back to those guys? And what does that tell us about the disciples?
They're not sure Jesus is going to be able to protect them, because Thomas's attitude is, well, we're going to die. You know, it's not like he'll protect us, we're going to be okay, we're going to die.
And how many times does Jesus escape the hands of the ones that want to kill him? Because it says it's not his time yet. However, the text communicates it, but his disciples are there with him every time the crowd starts, you know, coming in on him, or we're going to kill you, or whatever, and Jesus somehow gets away.
Well, you know, there's a story where they drive him up onto the cliff, and he walks right through.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to mess with this guy.
That's right. And on top of that, he can walk on water, which is pretty impressive, right? So we learned some important things there. So let's keep going. He says, the disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews are seeking to kill you. Are you going to go there again? I'm sorry, verse 9. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. Now, why do you think Jesus brings in this concept of the light?
Because in the Gospel of John, he is the light of the world. And therefore, you know, if his apostles don't believe he can take care of them here, what makes you think he can take care of you afterwards?
That's right. And John starts in John 1, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness is not overcome.
Yeah. And the problem with the world is they love the darkness more than they love the light.
That's right. And so Jesus, I think, here is making a point about the light is clarity, I think, is what Jesus is talking about. There's a purpose here. God's not going to let the darkness overcome what his purpose is.
Yeah.
And so verse 11 says, after saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. So now Jesus is laying out in black and white, here's what the purpose is. I'm going to wake him up.
Although they're still going to see it in gray.
Right. They're still seeing the wrong thing here. They're still, as a Colossians that says, you know, we need to set our eyes on heavenly things, fix our eyes. They're still thinking earthly application, right?
Yeah. I love, though, verse 12. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. So now they're going to advise him on medicine, too.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, Lord, you want to let him just sleep, okay?
Yeah, because we all know that Peter, you know, he's a pretty good doctor.
Yeah.
You know, he's resuscitated a lot of fish in his days. You know, he knows all about this stuff. Verse 13. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest and sleep. So they think he's just, you know, when you get a fever and you get sick and you don't feel good, you rest.
Yeah, he's
sleep
fallen into the sleep that's going to cure you.
But the
best
interesting
thing is
thing
for rest.
I mean, think about, they think Jesus is going to risk all their lives to go back and just wake a guy up
And
that's
wake him
taking a
up.
nap. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty crazy. Verse 14, then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. So there's your black and white, no room for interpretation, right? And for your sake, I'm glad that I wasn't there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him.
Yeah, so here's your purpose to the story. This is so that you can believe.
Mm-hmm.
And the word believe is going to occur a half dozen or more times in this story. And every time, it's the wrong kind of belief. Jesus is challenging them to believe, and whatever it is they've got, he doesn't see anything that looks like belief.
Yeah. And, I mean, again, he's telling them plainly, but you look at his statement, I'm glad I was not there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you were talking about Martha and Mary earlier and their reception of this. I don't think that statement's going to resonate too well with them. I'm glad I was not there.
Yeah.
Right?
Might not want to mention that one.
But again, he gives the reason why, right? Because this is about belief. This is about God being glorified. So here's Thomas's response, called the twin.
And one other thing,
Mm-hmm.
remember, this is where Jesus is going to cry.
Mm-hmm.
This is the story that everybody knows Jesus wept. So emotionally, he walks into a very delicate situation, and he's so frustrated and at looking at his friends suffering, when if they just believe in him, they don't have to,
That's right.
that he just cries.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Verse 60, so Thomas called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go. So now he's on board. Let's go with him. But you look at what he says, so that we may bear witness to the resurrection of Lazarus. Not what he says.
No.
Or so we can, now let's all go so we can all die together, And so again, it's kind of a bold statement of faith. Like, I'm ready to die with Jesus. Let's go, But then at the same time, you're like, I don't think that's what Jesus wanted you to take away from.
yeah, that's not what he's calling on you to do at this point.
Let's all go join Lazarus in the tomb. No,
Yeah.
that's not what I said.
As long as we're already in the area.
Right, might as well. So verse 17, now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now that's significant, I think, that not only has he died, they've gone through the process, the funeral, if you will, and now he's been buried, and he's been in the ground, buried for 4 days, which puts him past the threshold that Jesus himself is at, being in there for 3 days.
Yeah.
And what do you think the significance is that John's very specific here and wants to make sure we know it's been 4 days?
Well, there's a Jewish belief, we call it a superstition, that the soul hangs around for 3 days. To make sure the funeral's done correct, make sure everybody's grieving the way they're supposed to. But at some point, somebody could come back, but the soul is still in the area.
Mm-hmm.
Lazarus is 4 days. No matter what they believe, even they would say, no, the soul has gone on. He's dead, Joe.
And it's important, and I think both in the case of Lazarus and in the case of Jesus, it's important that they're buried.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just maybe dead, they're not just mostly dead, they are dead. And Lazarus, to the extent that it's been 4 days, I mean, there's been some corruption that started to settle in with it. Yeah, there's been some breakdown. So Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, we mentioned that earlier, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. So here comes Jesus, and Martha doesn't wait for him to get there. She goes to meet him. And let's see what her attitude was. Let's see what the exchange is there. Verse 21, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now let's kind of think about that for a second in the context of verse 14, when Jesus says to his disciples, I'm glad I was not there, right? Now she's saying, but if you had been here, he would have never died.
Yeah, and in verse 32, Mary's going to say exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think this is just, well, Lord, if you had been here. She's screaming.
Yeah, she's upset.
She's upset. Her brother's just died. The person that they knew loved him not only didn't show up for the funeral. Look, all of these other people showed
That's
up.
right.
And you couldn't take the time to come and be here. If you've ever tried to deal with people who get emotional at funerals and after the death of a loved one with someone they think didn't treat them right, this is not a calm person here. This is a person who's probably on the edge of hysteria.
And there's probably almost, I don't know if calling it respect is the right thing, but there's probably almost some of that in the fact she goes to meet Jesus where he is before he gets to the house where everybody else is gathered. Probably because she wants to give him the what for not showing up sooner, right? And not do that in front of everybody in the house, but, be very candid with Jesus about if you would have been here.
Yeah. And if we could,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what happens, no matter what she says, remember, she doesn't believe.
Mm-hmm.
Because if she believed that Jesus had come to resurrect Lazarus, as soon as she sees him, she's going to divert him down to the
That's
cemetery. Right. And even after all of this, verse 28, after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside.
Mm-hmm.
So she's not in a sense that, well, he's here to raise my brother. She's hurt, she's puzzled, she's a person who's lost a loved one.
And I think it's great to kind of make sure we understand the emotional context of all this, because here's Jesus knowing he's walking into this situation with the power to raise this guy from the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to do it because it's going to be for the glory of God.
Yeah.
That's his intention from the time he hears about it till the time he gets there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here's the disciples walking down the road with Jesus. And they're all looking in the woods, probably.
Waiting
All
for
of
the
them,
ambush.
They're breaking out in the sweat, right? I mean, they're like, we're all going to die, right? So
Yeah.
maybe they're saying their last prayers, and they're like, this is all over. Because when we get to that house packed with Jews, those are going to be some of the same Jews.
And
that
they
were picking
came
up
from
rocks.
Jerusalem.
That's right. So that's where the disciples' emotions are, right? Fear, anxiety, and here's Jesus coming down the road, knowing what he's going to do with Lazarus, and they're met by Martha, and you almost wonder if the disciples were thinking, she's going to tell us to book it and get out of here.
Yeah.
Like, they're coming with the stones, go, and but
Yeah, because the next part, verse 22 there, verse 21 is a very emotional statement.
yes,
But she realizes I'm screaming at Jesus. And so in verse 22, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Now to us that sounds like, hey, she's saying, she recognizes no. She just says, even though you've let me down, even though you've hurt me, I still believe in you. I don't understand what you're doing, but I still believe in you.
mm-hmm.
But she still doesn't have any idea that he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead.
Yeah, and I wonder what she has in mind that he's going to ask, because it's obviously not raising him from the dead, but maybe some kind of consolation or peace that he can offer.
Well, remembering too that she probably is looking at Jesus as a military messiah, and in a war people die.
Mm-hmm.
So she doesn't know what's going on here. All she knows is you could have showed up, you could have saved my brother, you didn't. But just want you to know I still believe in you.
It's almost, to me, harkens back to Job, right? The questioning that Job goes through, where he's like, I'm trying to wrestle with the fact that I've had all this loss, I'm grieving all this loss, and I believe in you, but at the same time I believe in you, why didn't you do something about it?
Maybe I've been believing the wrong things.
Right, and so that wrestling with God, and Job does it kind of from a distance until God responds, and she's doing it directly with Jesus. I believe in you, I know you can do things, but why didn't you? That kind of questioning.
Yeah.
23, Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Now, he's not talking about awake and asleep anymore. He's using a very different kind of terminology here. He's going to rise again. And she immediately connects with it. There's no confusion. She understands he's talking about a resurrection. A resurrection.
Yeah.
Not thinking he's going to rise from the tomb right now.
Or even the resurrection.
Right.
With capital letters.
Right. But she's thinking of a resurrection. So Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again. And she echoes Jesus' language there. That's right. Rise again in the resurrection on the last day. So again, not thinking about, you're going to raise him today, he's going to rise again. No, she's thinking in terms of, I know he's going to rise again someday, let's say, on the last day.
Well, her faith is all future. I know that God will listen to you. I know he'll rise again in the last day. I know, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. All of her faith is out in the future. She believes that Jesus can do stuff later. The problem is faith demands you to believe that Jesus can do something right now. And she can't get around that idea.
So Jesus responds to her, and this is a big statement by Jesus, and obviously fits in with the other I am statements from the book of John. But Jesus' response is, I am the resurrection and the life, and whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. And here's the key. Here's what ties it into what you were saying. It's kind of the thematic thing for chapter 11. Do you believe this? I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this?
Yeah, and I think you may have the emphasis on the wrong syllable there. Do you believe this?
Mm-hmm.
Because what he's saying is, I'm the resurrection. He who believes in me will die. Whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Because what she's going to do is she's going to come back in verse 27. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. That's not what he asked. She makes a generic statement of belief. But that's not what Jesus asked.
Yeah, and he's very specific with his declaration of what he is and what those who believe in him have.
It's present tense.
Right, which
He's
is life.
in present tense.
Yes.
And she's still off in the future.
So she replies, as you said, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, you're the Son of God, you're the promised one, is what she's saying, who is coming into the world. So all this exchange with Martha, obviously, Jesus trying to express some of what his purpose is, and but it's in no way resolved by this exchange. And so it continues on to the verse 28. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him.
You wonder, when did that happen? Because I don't remember it.
Yeah, exactly.
But her sister's in a state of shock. She
That's
hasn't
right.
left the house. She hasn't even been to the cemetery yet. She hasn't been to the tomb. She's still in the grief cycle. She's still in shock. She hasn't moved. And when everybody sees what happens, they're responding, "Oh, she's going to go to the tomb." But what finally she responds is, "Jesus is here. I got a few things I want to say to him."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we got to recognize, and we see it in verse 30, but Jesus hasn't actually come into the village. Remember, Martha went out to meet him. Then she pulls Mary off to the side and says, "Hey, Mary, Jesus wants to talk to you. He's here." And now Mary is going to go out to meet him, right? So she rises quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you got to wonder how much his disciples are wanting that to be the case, right?
Yeah.
Let's just stay here. We don't have to go into the village. Isn't this close enough?
No problem.
Let's
We'll
let
talk to
Martha go get her.
Yeah.
Right? No big deal. So then we find out in verse 31, when the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to weep there. So now everybody's coming together. Verse 32. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet. Now I think that's significant to understand that as we're looking at her statement. There's a posture here that I think is significant that John's drawing our attention to that wasn't the case with Martha.
Or she's just so emotionally overcome she can't stand up.
She falls, yeah. Saying to him, "Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died." So a reiteration of Martha's statement from earlier, and again remembering Jesus' statement, "I'm glad I was not there," right?
Because the next verse, when Jesus saw her weeping.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just, silent tears. This is the word for heart-wrenching crying out.
That's right. And it's to the degree that not only with her, but with the Jews with her, right? That's what causes Jesus in verse 33. When he sees that kind of weeping, the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Verse 34, and he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." And here's where we have this verse, Jesus wept.
Yeah.
So, again, we have his disciples who are afraid of a whole circumstance that has nothing to do with this in terms of them dying, thinking that their life's on the line by going here. Then we have all these mourners who come out, and their mourning is deep enough into the degree that it moves even Jesus to see the disbelief that's there, to know what he's able to do, and yet see that they're not believing it. I mean,
disappointment.
It's got to be huge, right? And again, Jesus has to deal with this in so many ways. You think about Peter and the rooster, right? And here's Jesus's final moments, and one of his closest friends that he's had in his ministry is betraying him when he needs him most. And then even when he comes back after the resurrection, he goes looking for him. They're all locked away in this room talking about how we're all just terrified and nobody, just paralysis of fear, right? So Jesus has to deal with this quite a bit in his ministry.
And Thomas, who says here, let's go die with him, I'm not going to believe it until I,
touch it with my hands.
Yeah.
That's right. So I think there's a lot here with Jesus' emotion and what's troubling him. I think he is grieving with them.
Oh, this is one of the most emotional scenes in the Bible.
Yeah.
Everybody's, and it's not just, some people are standing aside. Like you've been pointing out, the apostles, the Jews who were there for the funeral, Mary and Martha, everybody. And Jesus, it'd be like if you saw a friend of yours and you knew if you went to see this doctor, he could cure you. No, I'm not going to that doctor.
Mm.
It would kill you inside.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus knows what he's going to do, and nobody's believing he's going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's deeply disappointing to him. This is done so that you can believe. Do you believe? And he gets a slogan.
Mm. And
the apostles are pretty worried here. I never thought about that, but I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
The apostles have got to be, oh great, here they come.
Yeah, they just see this mob coming out, right?
And then the next time they see a mob like that, it's in Gethsemane.
That's right.
That time they all just leave.
Mm-hmm. And, Jesus does connect with people. We have the passage in Scripture where it talks about he's filled with compassion because they were like sheep without a shepherd.
Yeah.
He just looks at them. His heart breaks for him because he knows who he is. He knows who the Father is. And he sees these people who are in desperate need of a shepherd. God's right here. I'm right here. But then seeing but not believing, right?
Yeah.
And in places like in John 6 and verse 66 when it says a great multitude leaves because they can't take his teaching. They would stay for the food. But then once we get to that hard teaching stuff, I think I'll pass on that, right?
Yeah. And the rich young ruler, and it says that when Jesus sees him, he loves him.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells him, here's what you need to do. And he walks away. And Jesus just said, it's so hard.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus feels.
And we have to carry this with us because the contrast is equally great. All this weeping, this deep, deep seated emotion and grief and sorrow, and we know ultimately Lazarus is going to come out of the tomb.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to imagine the turnaround there of emotion that's going to take place.
Oh, yeah.
I
came to a funeral and there's not going to be one?
Yeah, what? So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man dying? Now, wow. That is an interesting statement.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there's some belief there, kind of like there was with Thomas. Like, I believe in Jesus to the point that I'll go die alongside of him. But still kind of misplaced, right? Like, couldn't this guy who could heal blind people have stopped this death from happening?
Yeah, and that's the key part there. Have kept this man from dying. Now that he's died, there's nothing that can
He
be
can't
done.
do anything. I mean, he's a guy
But
that
he could have kept him from dying.
He can make paralytics better. He can heal blindness, deafness. He can just rub a little mud on their eyes and they can see again.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, he can't raise dead people.
No.
Nobody can do that. That's impossible. Jesus, not even the Messiah, could do that. I mean, even though he has done it, right? Widow of Nain, chapter 7. It's already happened. But regardless.
Yeah. What have you done for me lately?
So let's just kind of let that resonate too. So there's some faith there, right?
Yeah.
They're acknowledging he's performed miracles. They believe he could have kept him from dying. So he has power, divine power.
Mm-hmm.
But not the power to raise the dead.
No.
Verse 38, then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone lay against it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. Love that.
Mm-hmm.
Roll that stone away, right? This is Jesus saying it. Now he's going to roll his own stone away.
Yeah.
But at this point he asked them, go ahead and take that stone out of there.
Yeah, and I think, we think, well, they're going to roll the stone away. That would have violated Roman law.
Mm-hmm.
It would have violated Jewish law.
Oh, big time.
Martha would actually be putting her life at stake here because the only reason anybody's going to move that stone is if Martha tells them, move the stone.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else, nobody else is going to do it.
That's right.
Jesus can say, move the stone. No. This is not you. This is their brother.
That's right.
So this is where it's coming down now to how much faith does Martha have? Are you going to put your own life on the line here?
Mm.
Plus, she's got her sister. Her sister's in a very delicate state. What if that smell comes out and her sister, who hasn't even been to the tomb yet, smells her brother decaying?
Mm.
That's all the family she's got left. In order to follow Jesus, can I put my sister at risk here? So everything now has come down on Martha. It's no longer, it never has been Jesus' story. It's never been Lazarus' story. This is Martha's story. Nobody's going to pay attention to Mary because you're still out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Martha's the one who's been taking care of everything. Only reason they're going to do anything is if Martha tells them to. It's her faith now. And that's why, the next one, by this time there's a bad odor. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?
Mm-hmm.
So here's what's at stake. If you believe, you'll see the glory of God.
And you got to imagine, the disciples are sweating again, right?
Oh, yeah.
They've been sweating on the road. Now we're going to the tomb. Then Jesus says, all right,
Open up the tomb.
go ahead and get unclean. Open that tomb right
Yeah.
up. And they're like, oh, we thought we were dead before.
Yeah.
Now we're all going to get shoved in that tomb.
Yeah, because they're looking for an excuse to kill Jesus anyway. They go back and tell the Pharisees
Yeah.
what
He's
happened
opening
here.
tombs. He's touching
opening
dead
tomb,
people.
man.
Yeah. So
He's lost his mind.
So they make the statement, right? The odor's still there. He's dead 4 days, and perfect tie-in to the earlier verses. Jesus' statement, "Did I not tell you if you believe you would see the glory of God?" Remember, that's been Jesus' emphasis from the outset.
If you believe, she still hasn't.
That's right. 41. So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may," and here again tying into what you're saying, the theme of 11, "that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go."
Yeah, he kind of hopped out.
Yeah, kind of like a potato sack race,
Yeah.
And I mean,
But it's interesting that once Martha takes it as far as she can go, the only thing she can do is roll the stone away.
Mhm.
And Jesus says, "Now let me take care of the rest of it."
now bear witness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our faith takes us to the limit of what we can do,
Hmm.
and then Jesus takes it from there.
That's right.
That's the story.
And their belief was only going so far, right? Like
Mhm.
this is something, at least for the people who are there, apparently it must have been something other than the disciples.
Yeah.
That they had not seen this done before,
Yep.
right? And so God is capable of doing things, providing things that we can't even, it's like Ephesians says, ask or imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Their imagination isn't very great here because
No.
they have a Messiah who can open the eyes of the blind and keep people from dying, but not a Messiah who can raise people from the dead.
Yeah. And then we're just about out of time, but
Yeah.
verse 45, therefore, okay, now that's therefore.
Mhm.
Because of this, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary, whoa, look at that. We've changed sisters.
Mhm.
They had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did, put their faith in him. Story about belief, and when they saw what Jesus did, they put their faith in him. And I think that's the whole key. Faith is not what you say. It's not your religious slogans. I believe that Jesus is, the Christ, the Son of God. I believe that Jesus is Lord. The slogans are not what your faith is. It's not when you say, and I believe this, and I believe this, and I believe this. It's when you take that and you actually do something with it.
Mhm.
You act.
Sure.
And that's when faith comes in, and not until then. I think that's why Jesus put baptism in there. Everything else up until then has been mental. I repent of my sins. I believe that Jesus is the Christ. I want to follow him. Okay, I'm going to ask you to do something. No, Lord, not going to do that.
Mhm.
Well, then you don't really have faith.
And even the acknowledgement mentally that I have to die to myself,
Mm-hmm.
right? But Jesus says, well, it's not just about knowing that you have to die, it's about being buried
Mm-hmm.
and then
Yeah.
being raised,
Yeah.
right?
And then tying into this week, Jesus goes to his own death. And he's not going to ask you to do something that he's not going to do himself.
That's right.
I have the power to come down off this throne, wipe you all out, and go back to heaven. I'm going to die. Because he has faith in God. And I think that's why this story is such a precursor
Mm-hmm.
leading up to Jesus' own death. And just as Lazarus was resurrected, Jesus will be resurrected.
Mm.
But with Jesus, it's because he has faith in God that even after I die, God can bring me back.
That's right. And it teaches us that faith and God's purposes are not wrapped up in things being convenient for us or easy for us, or Jesus' purpose as the Son of God was to glorify God.
Mhm.
Our purpose as His people should be to glorify Him because of what He's done for us and ultimately glorify the Father,
Yeah.
right?
And it's like in Hebrews when it says that Jesus, for the joy set before him.
Mm-hmm.
The joy is the resurrection.
That's right.
And so because of the resurrection, he could endure the cross. Because of us, for us, our faith will allow us to endure anything because we know that there's going to be a resurrection.
And according to Jesus, we never really die
No.
as believers.
This
right?
this will not.
I'm the resurrection and the life.
Yeah.
And whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live.
Mhm. There's a book by a guy named Calvin Miller. It's called The Singer. It's one of my favorite books. I read it at least once a year. But it says that death is the great confirmation. For the believer, confirmation. For the non-believer, confirmation too late.
Mm.
And that's what this story is all about. It's going to lead into the resurrection week. Because what Jesus demanded from the sisters is what he's going to demand from himself. And so as we go into this week, the greatest week the greatest day in the history of mankind was the day that Jesus was resurrected.
That's right.
Because now it shows us what is waiting for us. And Jesus didn't just tell us. He loved us enough that he walked alongside us and he says, now let me show you what's going to happen.
Mm.
And that's our faith. What Jesus did is what we will do.
Mm-hmm.
Not just I believe, but I will show you.
That's right. And what do you do with the fact that there is a resurrection?
Mhm.
And that's really what Martha and Mary and all these disciples that are gathered there,
Mhm.
what are you going to do with the fact
Yeah.
that Jesus can raise the dead, that he is the resurrection?
And then one more thing that I guess we got to quit, but
Yeah.
even after seeing that, there were still some that went back to the Pharisees. Hey, we got him now.
Yeah. And then the Pharisees say, well, let's go kill him
Yeah,
and Lazarus.
And Lazarus. But God is not going to overrule our free will.
That's right.
He will allow us to believe or not believe, and then we will bear the consequences.
Well, we hope that that was a helpful study for you this week. Again, if you have any questions or comments or anything, we'll be sure to put out the church email, and we'd be happy to have those questions. Want to let you know we are continuing to pray as individuals and as the church here at Smyrna for definitely all those people on the front line, for our nurses,
Absolutely.
and all those in the medical profession. For
Yeah, his wife is a nurse, and my daughter is a nurse. We've got skin in this.
physical
game.
therapist.
Physical therapist. She's going out to help people.
That's right. That's right.
And my daughter is a nurse in training, and so yeah, we feel the anxiety, and we will continue to have faith.
So we just want to let you know we love you. Wanted to give out this encouragement to you for this week, and we'll be back again next week to share some time together. If you think about it, if you can think of anyone you think, I'm sorry, if you can think of anyone who may need help having access to this class, please reach out to them by phone or share the link through your email directly to them. We know some people have been having trouble getting the link, so if you're not getting the link normally for this class, let us know and we'll make sure it gets out to you more readily. God bless and have a great week.
And thank you.